5 Minutes Behind the World. Chapter 1, The Clock That Never Catches Up. I've always been a little late, not in a hurried, disorganized kind of way, but in a quieter, more peculiar sense. It's not that I forget the time or that I misjudge the distance. It's that I live precisely 5 minutes behind everyone else. Not a metaphor. Not an excuse. Just a quiet truth. I discovered it when I was a child. I'd arrive at a bakery and find the door already swinging closed. I'd hear echoes of laughter just out of reach, trailing off into silence. People would pass me with the faint smell of their stories already fading, as if I had just missed them, and somehow, I always had. It took me a while to understand. Clocks betrayed me. Calendars were false friends. I kept thinking the world was elusive, that I simply wasn't fast enough. But one evening, I found the watchmaker. He lived in a crooked little house perched on the edge of the town, where the rooftops met the sky. I remember knocking softly. The door opened before my knuckles touched the wood. He had been waiting. "I thought you'd never arrive," he said kindly, holding a brass timepiece that pulsed like a heartbeat. "That's the thing," I replied. "I never do." The watch he gave me didn't fix anything. In fact, it didn't even tell time in the usual way. Its hands moved slowly, drifting in hesitant arcs, sometimes pausing for moments that stretched like days. And then suddenly, they would skip. Always 5 minutes behind. But something about it made sense. It was honest, at least. So I packed a small bag, wrapped the watch in linen, and left my little house behind. I stepped onto a path that shimmered ever so slightly in the moonlight. It led nowhere in particular. That was the point. The world I walk through is the same as yours, just a little slower, softer, quieter. The sun spills over the hills a few heartbeats late. The birds sing songs whose echoes are already past. Even the wind seems to hesitate before brushing against my face. I don't often see people. When I do, they're shadows, like dreams I almost remember. They flicker at the edge of sight, already having moved on. A girl at a well, her laughter gone before I reach her. A boy kicking a ball that no longer rolls. Lovers parting under an archway, their goodbye already spoken. They don't see me. Not really. And yet, the world is full. Of stillness. Of detail. Of memory. Tonight, I walk through a grove of trees that glitter like crystal. The leaves catch the moonlight and scatter it across the forest floor in patterns I cannot decipher. Each step I take feels like a note in a forgotten lullaby. I let my fingers trail along the trunks, rough and ancient, like the pages of an old book. A fox watches me from a distance. It doesn't run. We both understand the stillness. We both exist just outside of something else. I sit by a stream and watch the water swirl, 5 minutes behind its own reflection. The ripples form stories I never get to hear the beginning of. And that's all right. There's no rush. No deadline. The path unfolds in its own time, revealing one petal, one pebble, one glint of starlight at a time. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to catch up. To be in step with the world, to feel the laughter as it comes instead of hearing its echo. But then I think of the silence I've come to know. The peace in this place that is not quite now. It's not lonely, not really. It's just a little, quiet. And as I lie back on a mossy hill and watch the stars blink gently into view, each one arriving slightly after the others, I feel something like contentment. A soft, slow kind. The kind that lingers. Chapter 2, The Library of Unspoken Moments. There is a point along my path, just beyond the bend where the birch trees grow in spirals, that the ground begins to feel like pages. Not soil, not stone, pages. And when I step upon them, they don't crinkle or tear, but seem to absorb my presence like words once thought but never spoken. That's how I knew I had reached the library. It's not marked on any map. There is no grand facade, no towering doors. It rises from the earth as if it were always meant to be part of the land. Walls of living wood, windows of still water, and a roof that drips with vines and stars. The door opened without sound. It simply understood that I had arrived. Inside, it was not quiet, but not noisy either. It was filled with the breath of pages turning themselves, the hush of candlelight flickering across leather-bound spines, the rustle of thoughts becoming memory. No librarian greeted me. There was no desk, no card catalog. Only the understanding that here, nothing was truly forgotten. Only delayed. I wandered down aisles that curved like rivers, each shelf filled with volumes labeled not in words, but in moments. I saw titles written in the texture of laughter, in the warmth of a mother's hand, in the silence just after someone realizes they're loved. One book pulsed faintly, glowing a shade of deep violet. I touched its spine, and it breathed. It told me of a man who once built a clock that ran backward, trying to return to the moment his daughter was born. He failed, of course. But in the library, the memory of that attempt plays forward endlessly. Another book fluttered open as I passed. The air shimmered with the scent of cinnamon and winter. A scene unfolded, a boy staring out a window, waiting for someone who never came. Yet, in this place, the waiting never turns into disappointment, only stillness. These stories are not read so much as felt. They press gently against you, like warm cloth, or the hush of falling snow. I sat in a circular room where the ceiling spun like the night sky. Books hovered around me, not floating, but drifting, as if borne on currents I could not see. I could reach for any one of them, but none felt urgent. There is no urgency here. Only invitation. I let my fingers settle on a small volume wrapped in silver thread. When it opened, it whispered the story of a girl who whispered her secrets into a jar and buried it beneath an olive tree. Every year, she would return and add another. She never dug it up. She didn't need to. The act of burying was the act of releasing. I closed the book with care. It sighed softly, as if grateful. In the back of the library, I found a mirror. It wasn't placed on a wall, but embedded in the floor like a shallow pool. When I gazed into it, I didn't see my face, I saw moments I had just missed. A bird taking flight. A curtain swaying just after someone left the room. A candle being blown out, the smoke still curling upward. Always 5 minutes ahead. Always just beyond my touch. But for once, I didn't feel left behind. The mirror didn't judge. It simply showed. I watched the moments pass, like boats drifting down a twilight river. I nodded to them. They nodded back, in their way. On my way out, I found a single chair in the middle of an empty hall. Upon it rested a clock, unlike any I had ever seen. Its face had no numbers, no hands, only a slow ripple of light moving inward, like breath drawn in and never exhaled. I sat beside it for a long time. I don't know how long. That's the thing with places like this, they are not concerned with measurement. Only presence. When I finally stood, I felt lighter. As if something had been left behind, though I could not say what. A thought, perhaps, or a sigh I didn't know I'd been holding. Outside, the night had deepened. The stars had moved on, but a few lingered, waiting for me. The wind welcomed me like a friend I had not seen in years. Even the path beneath my feet seemed to hum with soft approval. I walked slowly. There was no reason to rush. I had just visited a place where nothing was ever lost, just waiting to be remembered. And though I was still 5 minutes behind the world, I didn't feel late anymore. I felt right on time. Chapter 3: The Cafe Between Yesterday and Never. There are places that don't appear unless you aren't looking for them. This cafe is one of them. I stumbled upon it while walking a path that curved away from the usual route, though, in truth, every path I take curves slightly away from the world's rhythm. The trees parted without fanfare, revealing a narrow lane paved with uneven cobblestones and lined with lanterns that flickered just a little too slowly. At the end of the lane sat a modest building with a green awning, worn and whispering in the wind. The sign above the door had no name, only a cup etched in faded gold, steam rising in a delicate spiral. The windows were slightly fogged from the inside, as if the cafe were still remembering the last guests who sat there. I pushed the door gently. A small bell rang, not sharply, but like a memory being stirred. Inside, the scent of roasted chestnuts and something sweet I couldn't quite place wrapped around me like a blanket. It wasn't warm in the usual sense, but it felt like warmth remembered. There were no other patrons. Just empty chairs and quiet jazz drifting from an old radio tucked behind the counter. The barista, if there ever was one, had stepped out, or perhaps never existed at all. Still, a cup of tea waited for me at a table by the window. Steam curled upward as if greeting me personally. I sat down without questioning. Questions are too loud for this kind of place. The tea tasted like lost time, soft, slightly floral, with a note of honey and something distant. A flavor I couldn't name but recognized all the same. I sipped slowly, watching the street outside move just a little too fast. Shadows of people passed by, 5 minutes ahead, their lives unfolding in the corner of my vision like silent films. A woman brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. A man pausing to tie his shoe. A child laughing without sound. I wasn't part of their stories. Not really. But I could witness them, gently, from behind the glass. On the table lay a book, not one I brought, but one that felt as though it had always belonged to me. Its cover was soft with age, the title written in invisible ink. When I opened it, I found only blank pages, until I blinked. And then, there were words. Handwritten. Gentle. Faint. Not my handwriting, but certainly my thoughts. Today, I arrived just after the rain. The scent of the world was softer. The leaves still held droplets that never reached the ground. I turned the page. More appeared. There's a certain kind of loneliness that isn't sad. It's shaped like quiet, and filled with things not yet spoken. It wasn't a journal. Not exactly. It was a conversation with the parts of myself that time had almost left behind. Pages I didn't know I'd written, unfolding one sip of tea at a time. A soft chime rang from the corner. I looked up. A cuckoo clock, carved from dark wood, ticked gently above the counter. Its hands spun neither forward nor backward, but in a gentle loop, a figure eight that never stopped. It didn't announce the hour. It simply existed. The bird inside didn't emerge. It didn't need to. Time here wasn't measured. It was steeped, like the tea in my cup, quietly, patiently, until it was ready. I stayed longer than I meant to. Or maybe I arrived early and left right on time. It's difficult to know in a place that isn't part of the timeline at all. When I stood to leave, the chair made no sound. The cup had emptied itself, or perhaps I had simply forgotten the last sip. The book was closed again, its cover now cool to the touch. At the door, I paused. The world beyond still moved faster. I could feel it. The thrum of urgency. The current I never quite managed to catch. But in the pocket of my coat, I now carried a warmth I didn't have before. The kind that remains long after the last note of music fades, or after the last page of a book is turned. I stepped out into the slow wind, letting the air remind me of who I wasn't trying to be. The cafe didn't vanish behind me. It didn't disappear in a puff of mystery. It simply stayed, nestled between yesterday and never, waiting for someone else who wasn't looking for it. And me? I continued walking, 5 minutes behind the world, carrying a quiet kind of fullness I couldn't explain. A gentle knowing that not everything needs to be caught up with. Some things are meant to be found, just a little later. Chapter 4, The Village That Wakes Too Soon. I came upon the village just as the stars began to fade, not vanish, but soften, like candlelight behind a thin curtain. The path curved inward, drawn toward a gentle valley cupped by hills that seemed to exhale mist. The village nestled there like a breath held too long and finally released. The chimneys were already smoking, even though the sky still wore its darkest blue. Lamps glowed behind frosted windows, and I could hear the quiet clink of teacups being set down, the rustle of pages turning. It was still night, technically. But this village had already begun its morning. I didn't rush. I never do. But something about the air here carried a strange urgency. The kind of energy that hums just before an orchestra plays its first note, but never quite does. As I entered the village, the streets welcomed me like old acquaintances, familiar, though we had never met. Each stone beneath my feet seemed to have been placed with intention, each tree leaning inward as if listening to something I couldn't hear. There were no clocks here. No chimes, no bells. But everyone seemed to move in unison, as though following a rhythm just out of reach. A baker stood behind her counter, already dusted in flour, her hands moving with the grace of someone who had done this forever. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed slightly ahead of me, as though watching a moment that hadn't quite arrived yet. I passed a young man sweeping the steps of a quiet inn. He paused for a second, his eyes flicking toward the empty road ahead. Then, as if remembering something he hadn't done yet, he returned to his work. I realized, slowly, that I wasn't the only one out of sync here. The village itself was 5 minutes ahead. Not by mistake. Not by accident. By choice. It was a place that chose to greet the world before it arrived. To prepare for the moment rather than live within it. The people here moved through gestures that anticipated footsteps, voices, weather. They lived in prelude. I sat on a bench beneath a willow tree that drooped like a question. In the window across the way, an old woman watered flowers that had not yet opened. Her movements were soft, practiced. She wasn't rushing the bloom. She was preparing for it. Around me, the world felt rehearsed. A dress rehearsal of a day that had not yet premiered. And yet, there was comfort in it. The baker's table already had bread cooling on its rack. The innkeeper's kettle was already steaming, waiting for a traveler who hadn't yet knocked. A schoolhouse bell stood still, but the chairs inside were perfectly arranged, each with a single notebook resting atop its wooden surface. Everything was waiting. But without impatience. I wandered through the narrow alleys and sunlit courtyards, and though the people rarely looked at me, I felt seen. Known. As though they recognized something in me, not my face, but my timing. I wasn't from this village, but I was adjacent to it. Out of phase, yes, but familiar. At the edge of town, I found a sundial made of polished stone, though no sun touched it. The inscription around its base read, "Better too soon than never at all." And below it, carved in a different hand, "But sometimes, exactly now is more than enough." I lingered there for a while, fingers tracing the etchings, feeling the intent behind them. Two truths, neither wrong. just different ways of being. As I turned to leave, I passed a child sitting on a step, staring up at the sky with quiet reverence. "Do you think the stars know we're early?" she asked me, not looking away from the fading constellations. "I think," I said slowly, "they don't mind. They just keep shining, whether we're ready or not." She smiled, not at me, but at the thought, and tucked a folded note into her coat pocket. A message for the future, perhaps. I left the village with a strange stillness in my chest. Not emptiness, not quite fullness. Just stillness. There was something beautiful in their anticipation, their careful welcome of what had not yet come. And there was something equally beautiful in walking away from it, into a world that always arrived just after me. 5 minutes behind, 5 minutes ahead. Both, in their own way, living between the moments. The path stretched on, softer now, the hills gently lowering themselves behind me like someone settling into a chair. And me, I kept walking, a quiet observer of a world forever just out of reach, yet always, somehow, within me. Chapter 5, The Garden Where Time Rests. I don't remember how I found the garden. It wasn't on any map, nor did any signs point the way. I simply turned a corner that didn't exist until I stepped toward it, and there it was, folded gently into the land like a page waiting to be read. The entrance was marked only by an arch of vines, heavy with blooms that whispered as they moved in the breeze. The flowers didn't seem concerned with sunlight or shadow. They bloomed in their own time, some still tightly furled, others already soft with the memory of color. I stepped through the arch and into the garden, where time itself had set down its tools and chosen, for once, to simply be. There were no clocks here. No ticking, no bells, no sunrise chasing after schedules. Only the gentle hum of bees drifting without urgency, the slow spiral of petals opening with no one to impress. It was a place made entirely of presence. The paths were made of moss, not stone. My footsteps made no sound, and yet I could feel each one as if the earth had accepted them like a letter slid beneath a door. There were trees that curved inward like old friends listening. Their trunks were wide and warm, and their leaves cast shadows that didn't quite move, lingering in place as if reluctant to leave. I walked slowly, though there was no other speed here. Even stillness felt like a form of motion. At the center of the garden was a small pond. It did not ripple. It did not reflect. It simply was, a still surface with no need to imitate the world above. I knelt beside it, watching nothing happen in the most beautiful way. A leaf floated on its surface, paused halfway across, and stayed suspended, as though even gravity had chosen to rest. Time had folded itself away here, tucked into the roots of trees and the curves of blossoms. Not hidden. Just, relieved. I sat beneath a willow whose branches swept the earth like fingers brushing memory. The air was cool but not cold, fragrant but not sweet. A perfect balance. A pause drawn out into something almost sacred. There were benches of carved wood and stone, each with cushions that never wore thin. Some sat empty. Others held impressions of those who had rested here long ago, shapes not of bodies, but of quiet moments. I found one, and I sat. I did nothing else. For what may have been minutes or days, I simply allowed myself to be held by stillness. As I sat, a thought drifted to me, soft, like mist. What if time needs places to rest too? What if it, like us, grows tired from always pushing forward, from always measuring, always moving? Perhaps this garden was made for time as much as it was for wanderers like me. Perhaps time comes here to exhale, to forget the ticking, to stretch its limbs and unfasten its bindings. And perhaps that's why I found it. Because I, too, needed to rest. In the distance, a wind chime sang, but not with notes I'd heard before. Each tone lingered, refusing to vanish, as if the air were reluctant to let go. I followed the sound through a corridor of silver grasses that bent without breaking. There I found a sundial, broken clean in half. Beside it was a sign, worn smooth, but just legible enough to read. When you forget what time it is, you remember who you are. I smiled, though I didn't know why. Or maybe I did, but the knowing was quiet, wordless. As I prepared to leave, the flowers near the gate turned toward me. Not all at once, not in alarm, just in gentle acknowledgement. A farewell that wasn't quite a goodbye. I stepped through the arch again, and the moment I did, the sound of the world returned, distant birdsong, the rustle of a breeze, the faint echo of the minutes I'd left behind. But I didn't feel rushed. I didn't feel late. Time had rested. And so had I. The path welcomed me again, soft and slow beneath my steps. And though I remained 5 minutes behind the world, I carried a silence within me that was deeper than delay. It was the stillness of having truly paused. And the knowing that, wherever I go next, I can carry that pause with me. A quiet, gentle space that no clock can measure. Chapter 6, When the World Finally Waited. The day began like all the others, soft, unhurried, and just a little out of step. The sky was already painted with the pale hues of morning by the time I noticed it. I watched from a hilltop, where the world below moved forward in its rhythm, 5 minutes ahead as always. People waking. Doors opening. The first birds tracing songs into the air. I stood still, as I always did, just behind the moment. And yet, something felt different. A subtle quiet lingered longer than it should have. The wind didn't push me along, it seemed to hover, unsure of which way to blow. Even the birds paused between notes, as if listening for something they couldn't quite name. It was then I realized, the world had paused. Just slightly. Just enough for me to notice. I walked down into the valley with cautious steps, expecting the familiar hush of echoes and missed chances. But today, the laughter I heard ahead didn't vanish. The swing creaked in rhythm with the child upon it. A kettle whistled from a nearby home, its steam not yet dispersed. It was as if time had turned its head, not to stop, but to see me. To acknowledge that I was there. That I always had been. In the town square, I passed a clock tower whose hands stood still, not broken but resting. A few townsfolk gathered beneath it, watching the pause with soft smiles, not concern. They didn't look startled. Just accepting. I sat on a bench and waited. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the world didn't pull away from me. It sat beside me. A man with a violin began to play. His tune followed no beat, no pattern. It simply wandered, like a bird discovering wind for the first time. I closed my eyes and let the sound wrap around me, not pushing me forward, not leaving me behind. We were both suspended. For a single breath, I was not 5 minutes late. I was perfectly here. Now. A child approached and handed me a folded note. I opened it slowly. In a hand not my own, but somehow familiar, the words read. We've been waiting. Not in front of you. Just beside. The child did not speak. She smiled, gently, like someone who already knows the answer to a question you haven't asked. And then she returned to whatever world still lay slightly ahead, but not out of reach. I wandered from the square, through a corridor of trees that shimmered with golden light. The shadows didn't outrun me. They walked with me. The rustling leaves fell in time with my steps. Even the clouds above slowed their dance. It felt like the world had tilted, not backwards, not forwards, but gently sideways. Just enough to meet me. By a lake that mirrored nothing but sky, I found a small wooden pier. I sat at its edge, my feet dangling above the still water. It didn't reflect. It didn't ripple. It simply held my presence like an open palm. And as I sat there, I thought about everything I had passed. The places. The people. The pauses. 5 minutes behind, always 5 minutes behind. But perhaps it had never been about catching up. Perhaps it was about becoming quiet enough for the world to notice me. And now it had. Time returned eventually, as it always does. The violin faded. The clock hands ticked gently back into motion. But something had shifted. The world no longer raced ahead. It walked a little slower. It waited, just enough. When I rose and continued on my path, I knew I hadn't caught up. But I also knew I didn't need to. Because in that moment, one unmeasured, unmarked by any clock, the world and I had stood in the same place, for just long enough. Long enough to be seen. Long enough to feel whole. Long enough to know. I was never truly late. Just moving at the rhythm of something softer. Something real. Epilogue, the echo that stayed. I have walked for what feels like a long time, though time has never been the measure by which I live. Perhaps it's better to say, I have been walking. That is all. The world has resumed its gentle spinning, and I remain 5 minutes behind, always witnessing the afterglow, the cooling light, the lingering touch of what has just passed. But something has softened. Not in the world. In me. I no longer feel like I am chasing. I no longer feel like I have missed anything. Because now I understand. There is beauty in the echo. There is truth in the pause. I sit once more beneath an old tree, not one I remember, but one that surely remembers me. Its bark is weathered, its roots deep, and its branches reach as if they, too, are waiting for something that does not need to arrive. Here, I find a kind of stillness that doesn't require silence. It is filled with soft sounds, the rustle of leaves turning stories in the wind, the gentle hush of petals falling without ceremony, the steady rhythm of my breath as I simply exist. Nothing asks me to hurry. Nothing urges me to go. And so, I stay. I take out the watch given to me long ago. Its hands still drift, still pause, still catch on invisible threads of almost. It doesn't tick like other watches. It listens. And in that listening, it becomes more than a device, it becomes a companion. It has never lied to me. It has never rushed me. It has never asked me to be anything other than exactly where I am. I place it gently on the grass beside me and close my eyes. The world is still ahead, still moving. But it no longer feels distant. It feels near, as though each moment it lives passes through me on its way. I remember the library of unspoken moments. I remember the cafe between yesterday and never. The garden. The village. The violin song. Each place left something with me, a piece of stillness, a thread of quiet, a memory that was never mine and yet always was. And as I sit here, I feel them all again, not as scenes from a journey, but as rooms within me. Places I can return to without walking. Moments I can live again without time. Sometimes, I wonder what it would be like to arrive on time. To be there when the laughter begins, when the teacup is poured, when the sun crests the hill. But those thoughts come softer now. They no longer ache. Because I've come to see what I truly am. Not late. Just different. Not lost. Just tuned to another rhythm. The world dances forward, and I move through the echo. And in that echo, I find details others leave behind. The way light lingers on stone. The hush that follows a kind word. The warmth that remains in an empty room. I see what others step past. I feel what others forget. And in doing so, I do not live less. I live deeply. A bird lands nearby, tilting its head as if considering me. It does not fly away. It stays. And we share this patch of stillness, this simple, unmeasured togetherness. The sun has nearly finished rising now. The world, 5 minutes ahead, is already fully awake. But I am not rushing to catch up. Instead, I rise slowly. The watch hums faintly in my pocket. The grass bends beneath my feet, not in protest, but in welcome. And I walk. No destination. No clock to chase. Only the understanding that every step I take is perfectly timed, for me. The path glows gently ahead, not bright, not dark. A soft kind of middle. A place in between. And I smile. Because I know now, the world doesn't have to slow down for me. It only has to remember that I'm here. And sometimes, just sometimes, it does.